Welcome to Shop Architects. I'm Chris Sharples. I'm one of the founding principals here at Shop Architects, and I'm really excited to have a chance to share with you some of the work that we've done here, but more importantly, a lot about the process. So much of what we're trying to do here is really about fostering, a humane, joyful, resilient built environment. And it takes, a lot of people. This is not, a top-down process. This is not like a ta-da moment, but it's really about an organic way of how we collaborate and iterate on design and how we share that design, not only with the people, the clients, the community, but also with how we share it with the build team and realize these projects in the field. So it's an incredibly exciting time. There's a lot of great technology available, but at the same time, balancing that with our role of creating humane, built environment that really builds on the idea of experiences and not just form creation. My brother and I both have learning disabilities. We're dyslexic. So we didn't actually think we could get into the field of architecture because you have to be really good at math and science and everything else. And having a learning disability, a dyslexia, I didn't really start to learn how to read until I was in 4th grade, it creates a certain amount of stress. You lose a lot of confidence because all your friends are doing really well and you're like, why can't I do just as well? So where my brother and I really excelled was in the visual arts and making models. People are like, wow, you know how to draw, you really know how to build models. And it built our confidence. It showed that we had something that we could offer. And so what I found, I ended up going to a liberal arts school and studying abroad in Italy for a year. And I realized there, meeting with my uncle, that this was the field that was meant for me, because it involved a lot about what I really delighted in, was making models and sharing those models with people, but then understanding how we take those models and make them at building scale. And that connection with airplanes and technology is something that pulled it all together. It's really understanding your moment in time, but also projecting into the future, how things will change. And it involves so many different things. It's not just about, designing space and working with materials. It's also understanding the process of how you bring these things together, but how you think about, the future of our cities, or you're thinking about, the issues of climate or affordability. So there's many different wicked problems that we're facing in both the nation and globally that architecture can actually have a role in helping to solve. Create great architecture really starts by creating a great public realm, that civic gesture. And because at the end of the day, the buildings really are the backdrop for this unscripted sort of series of events that unfold on a daily or an even hourly throughout the city. And so the public realm is so critical right now. And understanding how we understand it in terms of the social issues and creating that sort of equality within the public realm, but also in terms of resiliency, in terms of the environment. Our cities are getting hotter, they're getting colder. We're challenged with flooding. So how do we really start to rethink how we vision and create that great public experience? One of the biggest challenges we have with affordability is housing. And this country, just the United States alone, needs 4.6 million new residential units to meet the demand. And we're seeing it today. The fact is, home prices are sky high because there's not enough supply. But the bigger challenge is that the costs continue to go up. And so we really have to rethink the whole process of how we deliver quality housing that's affordable. And that's where technology plays a big role. And that's something that has been a big focus here ever since we founded the practice more than a quarter century ago. the key thing about our built environment, especially in our cities, because there's lots of beautiful buildings. We're standing in a building that's more than 100 years old. It's the first skyscraper that was built in New York City, the Woolworth Tower. It was the most innovative construction going on in not only in the country, but in the world at the time. And so the idea is, you don't want to throw that away. You know, it's not just about place making, it's about place keeping. You know, making that connection with the past and bringing it into the future. You know, a lot of our clients ask, we want this to be an authentic experience. Well, it's really about bringing those two concepts together. Something new, but with something that's old. And so what we're seeing right now, especially in Lower Manhattan, which my family and I live in, is this idea of how the office, these office buildings that were built at the turn of the century are adapting and changing, becoming residential homes. And what's great about that is you're not throwing your built environment away, which is probably the most unsustainable thing you could do. Just the amount of embodied energy that you're removing and then having to rebuild back again is how can we take this existing architecture and bring it into the 21st century? And this is where technology plays a big role, but it also opens up the possibility to think how it would be to live in a city that is really understanding its past, but looking towards the future. So much of what we do here is really making the invisible visible. And again, technology, in this case, augmented reality, allows us to, look at, in this case, how we could actually visualize all the components that you would need to create this one-bedroom studio, and including all the mechanical equipment. And what we find very exciting about this whole process is really how we can humanize the connection visually between how we design, but also how we would go about making it. This literally becomes an instruction kit, a virtual instruction kit that we can send to our fabricators and understand how the thing, in this case, this studio will be put together. And so here you can actually prototype and keep prototyping and testing until you feel you've got it right. And that's when you send it out and actually make it real. Climate change is already having a huge impact on our health and well-being. The challenge we face, and a lot of people may not know this, but the buildings contribute in our country close to 44% of the carbon emissions. That's the construction, the embodied energy in the construction of those buildings, and also the life cycle of those buildings. So that's a huge number. And so we are tasked, the architects, the engineers, the builders, the supply chain are tasked with how do we begin to knock that number down. And so there's a lot of focus on how to create much more efficient, higher performance energy systems to reduce the amount of carbon emissions there, but also looking at bio-based materials. As I suggested earlier with mass timber, for example, there's a material, wood, that actually captures carbon and won't release it unless it burns or it starts to rot. So in a way, the building becomes a carbon bank. And there's other materials, whether it's coconut core or 3D printed bamboo, but really the future of material science is going to play a big role in how we mitigate some of these challenges that we're facing with climate. Since 9/11, especially here in New York City, and even with the pandemic, when people saw the impact of significant change in a short period of time, they became much more aware of their environment and saying, I want to be a part of making decisions about what the future of that environment would be, whether it's 16 acres in Lower Manhattan at Ground Zero, or the idea that the restaurants open their doors and they actually take over the street, or the idea of going to Barclays and being able to have a demonstration to question, the issues that are occurring in the day. So it's very much about drawing the community into this conversation. We work at many different scales. Here you see a number of our master plans. This is one for Domino Sugar, which is a large master plan we did on the East River. So if you take the water taxi, you'll go right by that on the way up to American Copper, the Essex Market over there. But really, as you can see, as these move from renderings into the built environment, field operations, the landscape architects made incredibly beautiful park here. And what was great was the park was created before any of the new architecture was done. So the idea is the public realm was made first, connecting the community with the waterfront. And then we did the first residential building here. So really understanding the role of nature, biophilia, and connecting to nature is very much a part of what's on everybody's mind, especially now because of the pandemic. And then, as I was saying, the future of work and the connection to nature. I think if you see with our headquarters for Uber, we created this breathing facade that opens up using a building monitoring system, so it naturally ventilates the interior of the space. It's like opening your window and just letting the air come right in. And so for us, the architecture is always changing as a result of that. Even before we went into this pandemic and people started to question what is the future of work, what is the future of the office, is what was lacking, and working with some of our clients, especially our tech clients, this desire to look at how we could bring more nature into our work environment, that sense of connectivity to the outside. So this particular project is looking at ideas of how we maximize daylight to the whole office environment. How do we maximize views, connectivity, promote collaboration, and really move away from this whole idea of let's say, the cubicle or the one workspace, but really understanding how people really do need to come together and collaborate in real time in the office environment. We can create incredibly beautiful buildings, iconic buildings, but it's the experiences that people really remember. And the idea of walking through the city streets from neighborhood to neighborhood and seeing the differences, but in real time, in a collapsed moment, very different from being in the countryside, though I grew up in the countryside, I love the countryside, being in nature. But what's really exciting about being in the city is that intimate connection, that scaled relationship with people. And obviously we saw some of that go away for a period of time because of the pandemic, but we're now starting to see it come back, but in a different way, because people are starting to realize how important it is to have that relationship with humanity, and not so much about the car and the street, but really bringing people back into the public realm. What is the future of living? And what's exciting is it's telling us that we can achieve a higher level of flexibility, adaptability. We can work at home. We can also have fun in the office. And it creates this idea that people can actually begin to script their own sort of lives in a much more proactive way, in a more individual way, instead of just accepting that everybody comes to the office and works 9 to 5 and then they go home at night. That we could start to see the sort of sharing and blending of these two different experiences. And what's really important here is moving away from this idea that, you do work in order to make a living. The work should have a purpose. There should be a mission. And it's not only at the scale of the office, like what is shop's mission? And some of these things deal with affordability. How can we innovate and modernize the way we build buildings? But it's also individual missions and purposes. Everybody in this office has their own desires. They have their own sense of what is their design space. So it's really understanding how we bring those two scales together of the whole office and also of the individual, and how that translates to the home. And really looking for that symbiotic balance. And for me personally, you know, I'll be walking down the street on a Saturday afternoon, and I might have an idea for a project because of something that I see or experience on the street. And so the key is, it's not about all the ideas happen when you're in the office. They could happen when you're at home. They could happen when you're on vacation. So it's really understanding this relationship of work as something that's part of life.